People think that manifestation is about getting stuff. How do I get what I want? How do I manifest this? And what I think people misunderstand is that everything that we see, and the guides would say high, low, and in between, everything that we see and experience, we're in vibrational accord to or with, which means we're in energetic coherence with it, which means it's still something that we're contributing to at a level of consciousness.
Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. We are exploring the mystical side of life once again this week. If you enjoy our conversations, remember to subscribe, share with a friend. Today, we have Paul Selig back as our guest. Paul is the channel for the guides and an acclaimed author. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
So I have your new book in my hot little hands, A World Made New. This is book 3 of your manifestation trilogy. And I've underlined a number of things from this book. One I'd like to touch on, first of all, is behold, I make all things new. That word all, the spiritual circles I've traveled, it seems to me like people want to raise the vibrations of the things they don't like and keep the things that they do like.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, the guides have said it's not about fixing things or improving things. It's about re-seeing and re-knowing all things as of source. They talk about the one-note song. Sometimes they call it the word, sometimes they call it God or source. But they say everything is of that because nothing can be outside of it. We can have an experience of separation, but it's an illusion that we perpetuate. So the claim, behold, I make all things new, is not a claim that is made at the level of personality, because the personality is going to want to fix and get the marriage to work the way it should and get the better house and end this problem in the world and the way we want it to end. It's all terribly subjective, and it's a lot about manipulation, control. That's not what this is at all. It's about moving to a level of vibration and tone. They use the word tone a lot, where you move into an equivalency with things at the level of source. So you're no longer operating from the denial of the divine, which they say is the biggest problem we face. And the only real problem we face is deciding God cannot be or will not be or should not be, all those ways that we have been entrained to. They say, we've bought into separation for so long that we've created a world that operates in separation, and they're moving us to a level of awareness where we can, or the divine self within us can re-see, re-perceive. And they say by doing so, lift. So the re-perceiving is actually an alchemical act of renewal, of calling forth that which has been put in darkness back to the light.
Have they ever disclosed how we actually got here into this level of separation?
A bit, but mostly I get that we chose it. We didn't think we were going to get what we wanted, so we had to find ways to do it, pretty much like, if there isn't enough in my garden, I'm going to have to build a wall up and make sure the neighbors don't take the few potatoes I've got growing there, and if that doesn't work, and if they try to get over the fence, I'll build a bigger one and then throw things across it to make sure they never encroach. And this belief in lack and not enough, they say, is about deciding that source is not source. Source doesn't exist. If you know the source of your supply, you can be in a position to receive. If you don't assume your needs are going to be met, you're going to try to meet them in any way you can. And that's what we do. That's as much as I've gotten, but they're not big on history with me. It's not one of those teachings.
I wondered about that as I read this book, because it does talk about leaving the history behind and raising to a higher level. And I wondered what that does for history.
The book that preceded A World Made New was called The Book of Innocence. And they talked about the divine self or the monad or the God within as the aspect of self that does not hold the template of history. The guides have said that the personality structure knows itself entirely through historical data, what it's been taught and how it's experienced a world. And, we've all been party to this. But I never think that this is about eradicating the idea of history. It is about sort of seeing it, or what we've created, I suspect, through a different lens, so that we're not just perpetuating the old, which is what we know how to do. I mean, the guides have said, we've been in war for so long that we expect war. And so we always have one. And until we move to a level of consciousness where war is not anything that we could or would choose, because it doesn't exist at that level of consciousness, it's not a possibility we would entertain, we're going to have the old. That doesn't mean we have not had wars. It doesn't mean that war is an obligation to how we live in a world. The idea of conquering and pillaging and, all these things that we've been around with us since the guys have said, since somebody picked up the first rock and threw it at somebody else, we've been doing this. So, I perceive it as a hopeful teaching, but I don't think it's about forgetting. I think it's about re-knowing, realizing what was true, perhaps at the cost of what was not. And you know this, but history is generally written by the victors of war. We have a very slanted view, I think, in every way about who we are and who others are as a result of that, and bias and, cultural edicts that we perpetuate often, I think, without even knowing that we're doing so. And I think a lot of what's been going on in the last few years is, as the guides have said, everything that was buried needs to be seen, needs to be revealed so that it can be seen anew and made new. You can't really re-see something when you're hiding it, in the back of the closet, or, or wherever you want to pretend that it didn't happen. So it's a useful time, but it's a challenging time.
I think I asked you that because I had been asked once in an interview if, as we raise consciousness and we go to 5D, is the language that a lot of spiritual people use, or New Age spiritual people use, if all of the old ways of healing are just not effective or should be thrown out. And I didn't think that to be true. I thought that it would be better to use the things from the past that still work and lift them.
I mean, I agree with you there. I don't get that.
It's like another way of prejudice.
Yeah, I would think that was so. And the guys I work with don't talk about 5D. That's not, they're not, I'm not a good New Ager. I don't read this stuff, and I just don't know. I hear occasionally people say, is this what your guides mean by such and such? And I'll often say, well, it's not language that they've used, so I don't know. Perhaps it sounds similar. They talk about something called the upper room, and they say that's Christ consciousness, or a higher level of awareness. They say it's the highest we can attain while maintaining form. But they say a chair is still a chair in the upper room, but how you perceive the chair and perhaps how you value the chair is very different. How you know the chair, because you know the chair as what it's made from. And that's not just, wood or steel, it's source. It's everything is of the one song, the one note song. And so I suspect what that means is some of the systemic ways that we've been taught to value or decide about things may fall away. Who is valuable and why, what we should aspire to and why, what it means to be a man or a woman or anything, how these things have been entrenched through history. I think you're releasing perhaps more of the historical data that's attached to something than you are the thing itself. A chair is just a chair. You can decide it's a good chair because it came from an expensive store, or you can decide it's a good chair because it's really comfortable, or because it matches your couch. You can decide all these things based on meaning. It's a chair.
And everything will still have meaning. It's just a different meaning than what we've given it previously.
I suspect so, but I don't know. My favorite picture of my friend is my favorite picture because of the memory that I attach to that day or the friend or all of those things. I don't think there's anything wrong with those things, but really it's a piece of paper that's been imprinted with an image. And that's what it is. It's all what I apply to it. Everything is just what we see. My few experiences with this as they've been coming have been remarkable because you see everything and it just is. It just is. It just is without all the meaning, and it's spectacular, but it's not fraught with the emotional baggage that I would have given it. I had this happen recently during a retreat, and the guides were teaching, and a lot of us did, and we went like, whoa, this is really something. It just is. The guides would say, God is, God is, God is, but they say that we're still caught up in imprinting the meaning of what the word God holds. And so it's still operating in this kind of subjective way. And the idea of it just simply is, that was a mind blower. It's like somebody just pulled the lens off of the camera and it was just all there. And it was all remarkable. It just was. It's a very different thing. And when I say there's a neutrality to it, that doesn't mean an apathy to it. It just means it doesn't have the attachment of, this is an expensive watch. Look at the kind of watch I'm wearing. It's a watch, but you're seeing the thing as resplendent in its own right. And that's remarkable. Resplendent, not because it's Cartier or anything else, or because your father gave it to you, but it just is.
It's an appreciation for what it is rather than the attachments that you put on it.
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
So it also says up in the upper room that we're going to keep our bodies. A lot of people think that, ascension, we become spirit or light beings, but it was very clear that we still keep our bodies.
I've never gotten anything other, and my sense is that, it's actually a privilege to come and have an experience through form. But the challenge that we've had is we come from legacies of religion and, historically, where they say that, God is in the ethers and God is an old man in a cloud, or God is where you go when you die and the body is an encumbrance. There are scholars who look at the work that I do with the guides sometimes. And, I taught once with this guy, Jeffrey Kripal. He was the head of the religious studies program at Rice University, and he's got a lot of books on Gnosticism, things like that. He said, this is a Gnostic teaching. And Victoria Nelson, who was on the phone, was an occult scholar for the first 4 or 5 books. She was there. She said, no, it's a Hermetic teaching. And I don't even barely know the difference. But because the guides are speaking to the body and the importance of form. So what the guides have said is, as long as you think that God is in the clouds and you're stuck in the mud without God, you're going to miss it all, because God is also the mud. It's all things. And the realization of the inherent divinity of form is something that they teach, and they teach it in ways that are very physically palpable. I think the Book of Truth is where they got into this stuff first, and then they continued with it once that was established as part of their curriculum. So it's interesting stuff. I don't get that. Back in like 2012, when the Mayan calendar was up, and I was doing workshops, and people said, how could you do a workshop on this date? Nobody's going to be here. People will have ascended. I said, that doesn't work that way. There's always been people who think it's an escape. I understand the idea of rapture as metaphor for an ascension, but do I think people are going to be knocked out of their shoes? No, I never did. I don't think that this is about escapism. I don't think it's about escaping the world that we're co-creating. I think it's about the realization of the world in a higher way than we have, and that's a different thing.
I'll agree that there's been a lot of change lately, a lot of change really quickly. So many people take note of how quick manifestations happen, how quickly change is happening. One of the quotes from your book says that the shift you are undergoing and the velocity of the shift is only going to increase through the times you are in. How you manage your expectations and your experience in all ways will be a reflection of the consciousness you hold. So I find that kind of interesting because it implies that the rapid speed of this transformation and the manifestations that occur is going to continue.
I barely remember the books because when I'm channeling, I'm so busy taking the dictation. The first time I actually read the books is when I'm doing the audiobooks and I'm having to sit there and read through the whole thing aloud. And that's where I understand, the fullness of the teaching, where a reckoning in a time of great change, and a reckoning is a facing of the self and all of one's creations, and everything that we've created personally and collectively in fear will need to be reseen in a higher way. And this is a process that is happening now, and it's ongoing. I don't think we're done yet.
I don't think we're done yet either. Also mentions we are not the arbiters of change, but the ambassadors of change. And I think that's something really important for us to embrace, because we think we're causing all this negative change, and yet maybe it's just supposed to be.
One of the problems with sort of New Age thinking is that people think that manifestation is about getting stuff. How do I get what I want? How do I manifest this? And what I think people misunderstand is that everything that we see, and the guides would say high, low, and in between, everything that we see and experience, we're in vibrational accord to or with, which means we're in energetic coherence with it, which means it's still something that we're contributing to at a level of consciousness. How you see the chair and you decide its value will claim that chair for you in accord. So I think that we're accountable to our choices. I think that we are accountable to how we treat one another, how we value human life, how we value the planet, all that stuff we're accountable to. You break it, you bought it. I mean, it's ours to deal with. And I suspect we're having to see some of that now because we have to, because I suspect we can't go on doing what we've done. I mean, the guides have said, if you want to learn the folly of war by having no one left standing, you can do that. They don't judge that. I don't hear that it's going to happen. I get a more hopeful message, but that we're going to have to realize how we are participating in a world, a co-created world, and how our awareness and our consciousness is actually party to those creations. We're contributing to all of it. Do I think this is something that's happening to us? I think it's opportunity. I really do. I think it's all opportunity. I think some of it is hard and somewhat dreadful. And I think that we're looking at our own creations, not what some God has done to us. I don't think we're going to get this as being smited. I mean, I think if we want to learn the hard way, we can. And I think that's true with all growth. We get to choose some of that.
There's a lot of people that think someone or some type of beings are coming to save us.
I don't get that stuff. Other people get that stuff. I'm not knocking it. It's not what my guides talk about with me. And I personally, well, I'll give you this example. When the very first book, which was called I Am the Word, was published in 2010, I did a little book signing. The very first one, I think it was at the old Bodhi Tree bookstore in Los Angeles, which is a famous bookstore. I think I had 5 people come for the book signing. Nobody knew who I was. And I read a couple of paragraphs or pages from the book, and some woman in the second row raised her hand. She said, "This sounds like what the Arcturian Council of such and such is saying. And what do your guides say about those evil aliens?" And I was like, well, I don't know. And the guides piped in and they said, "Isn't it bad enough that you can't get along with each other here? You now have to vilify the rest of the universe." This is what basically they were saying. This is what you like to do. You like to find someone to blame. And and that takes away some of your responsibility to your own well-being. So I'm not knocking this stuff. It's just not what they talk about. And, if they were to talk about that, and if they one day will, I'll probably be in a position to have to go, oh, well, and then take the dictation, because I'm really just the radio for a transmission. I don't get to cherry pick what they talk about at all.
I tend to think that if we create the problem, we're the ones who fix it. I don't know if I like that word fix, but we deal with it and we learn from it and we grow from it. And it is what it is, right?
It's opportunity.
It reminds me of a quote from your last book that's also in this book about what you damns you, and the opposite, what you blesses you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard sometimes in this world because we do see things that, cause us some grief if we have a compassionate heart, or sometimes maybe some anger, some whatever. There's so many things going on. How can we look at those things and change it in our minds?
I'm an old-time 12-stepper, and one of the things that I was taught, 37 years ago or whenever it was look for the good or the God in everybody. And it's a challenge sometimes. And I like to sit and, be self-righteous. But I do believe what the guides say, which is self-righteousness is always the small self, or the personality self. And if I ever have an investment in being right at the cost of somebody else being wrong, I'm probably operating from my personality. So what you damns you back is a simple teaching. It's almost, I suspect, physics or something. It's who you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. It's just basic vibrational accord. In the fourth book, I think the guides dictated, the book of Mastery, there was a meditation where they invited the reader. They said, you're going up a mountain and there's a cave, and you walk into that cave, and the one person you never want to see again as long as you live is in the cave. And the opportunity is to bring them to the light. You're walking them out. They say, because you put them in darkness, they called you there. There are people in my experience that I don't want to see again, and I don't need to. And, I have boundaries, and I have the right to those boundaries. They have the right to be in the world, but they don't have the right to, climb over my fence and break into my house. And that doesn't mean I put them in darkness. It means that I'm holding myself in a kind of value as well. It's very challenging sometimes when you look at how people behave, and you look at how governments can act, and you look at choices that are made to support them. And I don't think this is about hypocrisy, and I don't think it's about whitewashing or what do people call spiritual bypassing. It doesn't exist. It's all okay. The guides have said many times, if you're walking down the street and there's two people fighting and you have the opportunity to stop the fight, you may do so. You're not just saying, well, they created it. In the New Age culture, you used to hear these things like, well, she created her poverty. And the guides would say, and she's also giving you the opportunity to learn generosity. She's also giving you the opportunity to lend a helping hand. The selfishness that we operate with is a whole other thing. So let me see if they want to say anything about how to stop when the damning occurs. They're saying, realize that you are the one doing it. They are not doing it. They are not doing it. You're operating from your opinion, your historical legacy, which should be your historical legacy of what should be, deciding what an outcome must look like, deciding what an outcome must look like, and being frustrated and being frustrated when you don't receive it. When you don't receive it, you realize whoever she is, to realize whoever she is, whatever he is, simply has a right to be, simply has a right to be. We'll do 50% of the work, as Paul said. As Paul said, you may do what you need. You may do what you need to decide your own safety, or your own well-being, or your own well-being, which opening up heavens. But when you start putting up fences out of fear, you're damning the world. You are damning the world and damning yourself in response, and damning yourself in response, period. And they're saying period. So that's them.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So your role here in this world is to be you, to live as you, and not infringe on other people or specifically allow them to infringe on you to be something other than you are.
I would say that's true. You know, I mean, it's a teaching of being. It's not a teaching of behaving, you know, finally.
And accepting all as being a cell in the body of God, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Anything about opening heart chakras and how that unconditional love is going to spread through humanity at some point, and maybe why we don't tap into it
I
more?
probably mentioned heart chakras 4 times in 12 books. So they don't talk a lot about the energy systems. They've said it's God that loves through us. I think it's about how can I, well, I'm going to have to go to them. How do you do this? You have to understand. You have to understand that whoever stands before you is worthy of love, regardless of how they present what they have done, or what they are choosing to learn through. You understand that love. When you understand that love is not dependent on behavior, or you are getting what you want, the love will flow readily. When you decide in advance, when you've decided in advance who is worthy of love, who is worthy of love and who is not, and who is not. You're playing a hard game. You are playing a hard game of separation. You will not know love, and you will not know love. You will know your preferences. You will know your preferences, which is quite different.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, guides.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question because we're here in this dimension, this place that we're in, the lower personality, and we have our more divine presence that still is connected and eternal. And yet it seems like we have to make the agreements here on this level.
I think you're asking about the use of will in this, and it is choice. And, you know, I understand that. And because the guides I work with don't override free will, and I don't think any high-level guide will. I really don't think it works that way. But the choice to align to the higher, I think, is made here. It may be inspired by the highest. You know, I didn't come into any kind of awareness of spirit until my own ability to fix my problems at the time were gone. And I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And then I asked for help, and the help showed up fast, real fast, in a way that was remarkable and that I couldn't ignore. So when I was in my early 30s and struggling with everything, I'm sure, but also with starting to channel and what was coming through. And I always have to say, I'm 99% sure that I heard this from the guys, because I wrote it on a piece of paper because I didn't understand it, and I stuck it in a book. What I heard was freedom comes when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? And basically, it just means who's running the show. That's it. What aspect of the self is commandeering reality and deciding how things should be and how they should look? You know, my personality self can be like, the Red Queen and Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads, That's the personality self. Now, the personality self, or they don't really call it the lower self, they'll say the small self sometimes, is also of God. It's not wrong. It's doing the best it can with the tools it's been given. I mean, the guides have said it's like we're born into a pool that somebody already peed in, We don't know the difference. It's just what we know. This pollution, which is fear, has informed so much that we expect it to always be there. The aspect of self that is unafraid and isn't operating in judgment and isn't trying to get its way all the time is what they call the God within, or the monad, or the divine self, or the Christ within. They call it a lot of different things. I don't think it matters what it's called. But that's the part of us, I suspect, that moves into primacy. But it does that through agreement and willingness. And if you hear things like, I will to will thy will, I used to think, like maybe it was my old 12-step stuff, but, thy will, not mine, be done, as if there was something wrong with the will itself. Like, my will is just awful, so please. And then I became very passive for a period of time. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what God's will is for me. So I did nothing. But when you move into an awareness that the will itself can be offered and utilized in a higher way, it gets a lot easier, because you're not trying to get your own way all the time, and that's how I see it, at least.
You probably have a greater level of clarity as well.
Yeah. The guides have said the true self knows, the small self thinks. And they say, go to a time in your life when you knew something, you really, truly knew it. And they said, whenever you've known something truly, there's never been a question about it. And when I'm thinking, there's always a question. Nothing wrong with thinking. I have to do it every day and all the time, but it's different. And when I'm moving to my knowing, which is what I'm doing when I'm operating as a channel or reading for people, I'm more out of the way, because I have to be effective. If I do question, they respond. I interrupt the teachings all the time when something is confusing to me. But I've become aware of the difference, and I have to say that in most ways, my life has gotten infinitely easier. Infinitely. Everything that used to be a struggle, a lot of it, some things still are. And I have areas where I need a lot of, growth still, I'm sure. I don't claim to be enlightened or done. I tend to be wary of people who say that they are. I don't buy it. I think people that are enlightened aren't walking around announcing that they're enlightened. I think they're just being, they just know, and they're doing their thing, and they're probably of great service, and maybe not in ways that, get them before lots and lots of people. One of the most enlightened people I ever met was a Bowery bum who years ago, like in the 1940s or something, was stopped by a Salvation Army worker. They prayed on the Bowery, and he had a full-on awakening. He was a delight. I don't think he ever lived in his own apartment. I think he was in SROs his whole life. He was a delight in the world. I never forgot this guy. It was shocking to me. And the guides sometimes say, the school crossing guard in your neighborhood may be the highest being in the neighborhood. You don't know, so that's how I see it.
So important not to judge. The book also says that we are here to learn and to grow, and that's why we shouldn't judge other people, because we have no idea what their life path unfolds in the soul level they really have.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious, Paul, because we talked about how all things are going to raise vibration, right? The all is lifting. And we also talked about the small self needing to say yes or giving permission. So there's a lot of people on earth that aren't anywhere close to giving permission yet. So is it something that, as the world changes, they're just going to be swept and carried up?
Heard it's like 4 generations. That's what I've heard, and maybe that's convenient, but that's what I've heard. And I do hear that people being born now are being born with a higher awareness already. I mean, they're coming in sort of prepared for what they're choosing and facing and how things might be different. I also think that at times we learn because we have to, not because we want to, I mean, you hear often that, the spouse was unaware of their partner's cheating when the whole town knew about it. They didn't want to know. They didn't want to know. It was inconvenient to their reality to learn that. So they chose not to learn it. And then they do. And the world falls apart. And then hopefully comes back together in a better, higher, more honest way, And I think we face some of that. I don't know. And, I do hear that the level of vibration on the planet is escalating. So the density or the darkness or whatever you want to call it is being confronted, and often sort of making a real stab at sticking around. And that's usually done through fear and separation. But I get that it's harder and harder and harder to maintain that. But I don't think, and this may be helpful, I don't know that everything lifts. I mean, if you have a house where the foundation is basically based in fear, I don't know if the house lifts. If what's holding a system together is control, or greed, which are all, things that are somewhat fear-based, I don't know that they lift. They may have to be reknown in a completely other form. We're always taking the seeds of the old with us into the new. And if the seed of the old sort of has a basis in, I'm going to get my way at the cost of others getting what they need, it may not last. And I think we're seeing some of that. I think we're seeing collapsing of structures, and probably will continue to. Is that fun? No. Is it graceful? No. Is it happening the way I think it should? Absolutely not. But whatever I think about what should be still is based on my sense of how a world should work, based on what I grew up around and what I would expect. And that's the history that I would seek to perpetuate, because I don't know the difference, even if it's not a healthy one.
If you could suggest one of the affirmations from the guides that could maybe help people through those places.
Yeah, the guides don't call them affirmations. They call them claims of truth. And they say what is true is always true. I suspect that the claims, and there are three: I know who I am, I know what I am, I know how I serve. Now, the guides are saying that these things are claimed at the level of the divine self. The divine self always knows who it is and what it is and how it serves, which is simply how it expresses. It's not what its career is or how it shows up in the costume of the new age, whatever that might be. Who you are is the divine come as you. What you are is a manifestation of this, and how you serve is how that divine self expresses itself. And those are energetic claims. They operate with frequency, and they can support people in awakening to their true meaning.
I think that's a perfect place to start. Paul, where can we send people who might like to know more about your work?
My website is my name, paulselig.com. I do a lot of live streams. The guides are teaching all the time. And I do live events again. So I'm easy to find if you go to my website.
Thank you so much for being our guest this week.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime, Paul, anytime. And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Come visit me at thoughtchange.com, and we will see you again next time. Bye for now.